Yep, so recording is started. There's our nice, friendly, automated voice telling us the recording is started. Okay, great. I can see, we're looking at two screens here, by the way, just so you know, in Hungary, India, and Toshi, Japan, and we can see the live stream on the class page on the Global Class website. So we can see the live chat coming as well, too. Okay, so we're good. I'm getting a thumbs up from Sandeep. Excellent. Okay, guys, so we're good to go. Thank you all for your patience in getting connected. It has never been a perfect startup when we're starting a global class. That's why we always spend, a good 15, 20 minutes to work these things through. But we are now connected. It is 9:15 a.m. Toronto time, or Oshawa time. Oshawa is very close to Toronto. And we'd like to welcome our participants from other time zones and other parts of the world for one more global class, which will always be, like all the global classes, a great conversation. So first, before we begin, I'd just like to welcome you from Durham College in Oshawa, Canada, with my students. I'm Lon Appleby, the host of today's global class. These are my students with me. There will be more coming in as we get closer to our normal start time. And we welcome first Bangalore in India, Christ University. Great to see you all. There's a good turnout there. And it is 7:45 p.m. What time, Madhu?
7:45 p.m.
7:45. Sure. And Madhu, is it possible you can lower your camera just a little bit? I don't know if you have that option, because we're seeing a lot of ceiling and a lot of lights. And it's just, I don't know if that's better. Yeah, now we get more people and things. Yeah. Part of the beauty of a global class, that's good. That's perfect. Oh, yeah, good. Okay. Part of the beauty of a global class is seeing other people and what their location is like. So it's not just what we say, but it's also what we see. So that's important. Even things like what are you sitting in, how you're dressed, what kind of curtains you have. I find that interesting, because you're thousands of miles away from us. Anyway, so welcome, Christ University in Bangalore. We have one participant from Japan, from Seisei University, a professor there, Toshinori Saito. Toshi, great to see you.
Yep, nice to see you. Yes.
And what time is it there now?
It's 11:19 p.m. So
yeah.
Late at night.
Yeah, it's late at night, exactly. This is the first time we've had Japan participate in a global class, and because of time zone differences, it was difficult to get the students out this time. But Toshi wants to join with his students eventually, but he's at home, and I know he has to put his son to bed soon or something like that. So yeah, we'll. So you may have to leave. Go ahead. Go ahead, Toshi. Sorry.
So my son is sleeping in the next room. So something's happened. So I have to go. But now
okay.
It's very safe. Okay.
It's safe. Yeah. Okay. I think we all. We all understand because although none of us can remember, the truth is everybody has been in that position in their lives. They were a child, they were waiting for their parent to come and take care of them. So we can all relate, I think. I'm pretty sure we can. Okay, so Toshi, thanks. And then, of course, at last is Budapest Business School in Hungary. Thank you. They have been a long-time partner as we built the global class, and just wonderful participants. Daniel Seabees has been coordinating things there. Corinna is with him as well. And today, what we're planning to do is, right next to Daniel, on his right at the moment, is Professor Thomas Novak, just waving. Hi, Thomas. He is an economist and the director of international relations at Budapest Business School, and it is largely going to be his class. He is our guest today because we are exploring the global economy, and he has a lot to help us understand in terms of how that works. And so what I'd like to do is, just before we begin, I'd like to let each location perhaps say anything that they would like, if they have any questions, and then we will move on, Thomas, and let you do a presentation, a brief presentation about the global economy, and then we will have our discussion. So first, before we do that and we go to each location, I'd just like to remind everybody that this is a global class, and this is about the planet as one whole. So the space we've entered right now for the next 90 minutes in this cyberspace is that, yes, there is a Hungary, yes, there is a Japan, yes, there's an India, and yes, there's a Canada, but in truth, there's something bigger here. And that's this. And that's what we are really exploring, is how we, from all of these different parts of the world, can work together and live together in a peaceful way on planet Earth. And one of the big systems that unites us and divides us on planet Earth in this global civilization we have is the global economy. It is maybe the most important system globally today. So Dr. Novak will be able to help us understand sort of how that works in an introductory way. And he's prepared a talk called Geographic Comfort Zones. So I'm really looking forward to getting to that, and then we'll talk about that. So first, before we go to Dr. Novak, in Bangalore, is there anything you would like to ask or say at this point before we do the sort of more introductions here and then go to Dr. Novak? Anything you would like to address? You're welcome to. No?
Students for madam, you please say about the group of students here.
We have here students from masters who are doing masters in international relations, and we also have students who are doing bachelors in history, economics, and political science. So we are looking forward to what Professor Novak has to say about the global economy. I think the students will be more comfortable asking questions after the introductory sessions than before starting off.
Sure.
So we would like to hear them before we start the questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madhu. In Budapest, did you hear Madhu? All right, just raise a thumb if you heard her. Could you hear Madhu in Bangalore? So? Okay. Just, Madhu, just say that again, but just more loudly, okay?
Okay, so we have students from master's degree from international relations, international studies, and we also have graduate students who are studying history, political science, and economics. And all of them have at least one course in international economics. And we would like to hear the introduction before we ask the questions. Thank you.
Sure. Are you okay in Budapest? Do you want me to repeat? You're good? And Toshi, did you catch most of that? Were you okay? Did you hear Madhu in India? Oh, I think you're muted. You're muted now, Toshi. Turn your microphone on. Yeah.
Sorry. Sometimes
Sure.
the too noisy, or sometimes too loud, or the level is too high, so disturbing the sound. So I cannot hear. I'm sorry. It's I cannot hear clearly about her speech. Okay?
Sure. No problem. What I'll do is I heard it clearly, and I'll repeat to you, and then I'll kind of translate when I can, just very briefly. What she said is that she has a lot of master's students and graduate students who are studying political science and economics, and that she would rather wait until after Dr. Novak's presentation before they ask questions, okay? So, great, okay. So finally, Toshi, is there anything that you would like to say before we just quickly come here and then go to Budapest? Anything in terms of the content of today's class?
My speech is very short. First, I'm not the specialist of economy or some kind of cultural studies or not. I'm only a researcher on the pedagogy of media and computing. So I'm very interested in your economy or sometimes like the culture or so.
Ashley, is there anything you want to say before we start? Any question you have? You're welcome to it. And then we'll go over to Thomas or Dr. Novak in Budapest. Anything? No? You don't have to.
I think I'd like to hear.
You like to hear? Okay. Yeah, I think we're all anxious to hear Thomas or Dr. Novak. So I think, Thomas, we are ready to, throw the ball. If I could, I can't throw it. Okay, I got to throw the ball, but here I'm going to give you the planet. Okay, for now. Oh, you've got it. Oh, Corinna, that's fabulous. When I was in Hungary, way to go, Corinna. You brought it with you. Lovely. Okay, Thomas. So you have the planet. Tell us about geographic comfort zones, the economy, whatever you like, and then we'll listen, and then we'll begin our conversation, okay? So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, so good morning and good evening to everyone. It's quite complicated to address correctly the time zone, but now it's quite clear that we have at least 3 or 4 time zones included. And here are our students who are also BA and master students of international economics and international business mostly. And just to add to the complexity of the global class, we have students coming from very different parts of the world, including Moldova, South Africa, China, and many other countries. So it's very complicated. So I'm trying to be as culturally sensitive as I can, because we have so many nations included here. So first of all, I would like to make a very brief introduction regarding the framework conditions of the current global economic development and major drivers. So the first point is the drivers of global economic relations at state level. So let's see the state level. What can we see currently? The first point is that we must mention the United States as a player. And there have been several changes in the recent year. And we might say that the current US administration seems to behave differently on the global economic relations compared to the previous decades. Let's put it this way, which mostly concerns the level of liberalization, level of free trade among countries, including the United States. I just want to mention 2 simple examples. The first is related to the new US administration policy on the North American Free Trade Agreement and area. So there seems to be a change. The other example relates to the so-called Trans-Pacific Partnership, which mostly relates to the Asia-Pacific region. And it was meant to be a very big economic free trade zone, including the United States. But after the elections, it was simply just erased. So this is clearly a change compared to the previous years, that instead of free trade and instead of liberalization, something new can come in the future. So the second point here relates to China. And we have several Chinese students here. And what we can see about China is the growing importance of China in the global economic affairs. And it is expressed mostly in the more and more significant international investments and international trade. Just for your information, that the Chinese Prime Minister is currently in Budapest, because China is very much interested in the Central and Eastern European region. And we are also very much interested in China, of course. So China has big investments. They want to build a tremendously big infrastructure coming from China to Europe. So that's the second very important driver, current driver. The third driver relates to, and I would use a keyword as restructuring. Restructuring here means that countries and continents like India or the African continent are emerging very, very rapidly because of the quite significant GDP growth rates. So the economic growth is significant. And in addition to that, there are the very significant changes. In India, a lot of people can get jobs in the next decades, and the same is true for the African continent. So it seems to be that there is a clear restructuring. Then comes the European Union, and what we can say about the European Union, that it seems to be that the earlier successes of the integration has been questioned in the recent years. And Europe does not seem to be success in relations and the United States and Europe. And you are US Canadians, you might definitely know about the Canada-Europe Free Trade Agreement, which has entered into force just recently. But at the same time, there is a planned agreement between the United States and the European Union for transatlantic trade and investment partnership, which has been questioned. So basically, these are the most important changes and drivers at state level. And let's move forward. That there are additional drivers in the global economy currently. The first relates to economic and political theory and international relations theory, which considers the question of liberalization and protectionism. Economic protectionism, economic liberalization. In the previous decades, it seemed to be that there was a kind of mainstream agreement which said that liberalization is rather good, at least in the Western world, and protectionism is not good, because that can limit the economic development of the countries. But now it's not so clear whether protection is good or bad. Liberalization is good or bad. I don't know. Maybe you know better than me. But you should answer to that. But definitely there is this kind of theoretical change. The second point relates to technological advancement, internet, logistics. These are very, very important. In Hungary and in your countries as well, our students can choose to buy things and goods through internet, either from Amazon, a giant US firm, or from Alibaba, a giant Chinese firm. That's something. So you can choose between them. And I can tell you that most of the students and myself probably will choose Alibaba because it's cheaper than the Amazon. So that's...
Wait a minute, let me stop you there for a second. I've never used Alibaba, but when you go to, I go to Hong Kong and try, but have you used here, Alibaba?
Yeah, people
really?
do.
Yeah.
A lot of people do.
Wow, the power of China, huh?
Every year they have like an annual sale, and this year was the highest. I think it was $30 billion worth of sales in one day.
Jeez.
The President Jack Ma promotes it.
Thomas, I confess that I get to Hong Kong quite a bit, and mainland China a little bit less. I've yet to use Alibaba, but I know of it. I didn't realize it. So, just can we stop for a second? Brian, go ahead.
There are also other even cheaper sources. For example, my Korean family uses an even cheaper Chinese-sourced online store. And even though a third of the packages they order never show up,
really?
It's all so cheap, they still saved money.
Wow, it's so interesting. Thomas, we'll come right back. Your point about your second key driver is China. You talk about the United States, but then you say, so we really China and then India. So we'll return to that. Because it's fascinating. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Please continue.
You see now that the technological advancement is really important thing, and your students know it's better than you, probably. So, and the third point
very true.
And the third point here is related to internationalization of education. International students are coming from everywhere to several countries. And I'm almost certain that in your country or in the United States, the biggest demand for higher education is coming from China, India, and African continent. So that is, again, something, because several hundreds of thousands of students are just studying in different countries. So the question here is that what can be the implication of that? And it is also related to liberalization, because without economic and political liberalization, it could not have been achieved. So that made a difference. So there are many students coming from these countries, and we have a big international student body, and I love that. But I'm very curious about its implications for the future. What does this mean in our life? Or better to stay in their life, because we are too old. But anyway, we will see. And it comes to the fourth point here, is the changing of the meaning of geographical distances. So just 200 years ago, it was almost impossible to travel between continents, or it was very difficult. Now it's very easy. So it again increased the number of the contacts and the number of the interactions between the people. That's again related to, I would say, liberalization of protectionism in global, international political relations and global economics. And then, after identifying probably some of the most important drivers, let's see the future. So what alternatives can be for the future based on these different drivers? And I would say that the first alternative is just say that, okay, let's wait and see what happens. What happens in the United States, what happens in China, and the other countries will just wait and see what the giants will do in the future, and they will behave accordingly, and they will adjust to these changes. The second point, or the second alternative, can be that the global economic and trade liberalization will be stopped. A kind of disengagement and the emerging protectionist tendencies in every country due to migration, due to economic interest, or any other. So that can be the second alternative for the future. The third theoretical alternative can be that large-scale initiatives would appear, like the Chinese initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is exactly aimed at building a large-scale infrastructure between China and Europe, making it easier to travel and to sell products from China to Europe and from Europe to China. That it's a kind of replacement of the earlier role and position of the United States or the European integration. It might be. So this is the third possible alternative. The fourth is I would say that a trade war between the countries, but in economics. Trade war, which was exactly the case between the two world wars. It was 100 years ago, but at that time, and we don't remember for that, but at that time, most of the countries turned themselves inside. They just emphasized their own domestic interest, and the result was a kind of trade war between them. And the result was terrible. Just think about the Second World War. And the fifth point is that it might happen that the states will voluntarily enter again into a kind of multilateralism, which means that let's go to the negotiating table and let's discuss the problematic issues in international economics and trade. So I see these 5 possible scenarios for the future, and I'm very interested in your opinion on that, and of course the opinion of our students here. So thanks a lot. That's a brief introduction to that.
Thank you so much, Thomas. That brief, it's to the point, it's so well organized, and there's a lot there that we can build the whole class around. So I would like to throw this open as quickly as possible. There are a lot of things we can talk about here. I particularly love when you talk about the future and what it might be. But let's start, okay? And we also have, just so you know, everyone knows, we can see here the live stream on the website, and I see questions already on the live chat feature coming in from Bangladesh and elsewhere. So we'll get to those. So for the live stream viewers who are sending questions in, I'd like to first give everyone here a chance to kind of address Dr. Novak's points, and then we'll get to the live stream questions. So why don't we start then, okay? Did I see, just give your name first, okay? So I know, and then we'll continue. So we'll start here with Abhinav, and then we'll just all guide it, try to keep the chaos more or less organized, but chaos is good. It's creative. So, Abhinav, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in this debate between liberalism and protectionist style of economic development and running the economy, we need to focus on forced liberalization of the economy. I think it was that countries that had not yet reached the mark of GDP to join the EU were allowed to join the EU. And because of this, countries like Greece, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and Iceland, which were also part of the EU, are now facing such economic disasters. I mean, at one point, Iceland had the highest income per capita and the highest net worth per capita, but it was just a housing bubble because of the free flow of currency around the country, right? So we must focus on having a liberalization of the economy, where when you set certain rules, such as GDP and the amount of income per capita that is allowed to join the EU, only such countries must join the EU. Otherwise, the stability decreases and it decreases the trust in the system, which is why a lot of protectionist movements have risen across the European Union, such as Brexit and the new Austrian Prime Minister, who is a extreme far-right prime minister, right?
Sure.
So we need to focus on how liberalization must be done in a right way, and not so that it doesn't spoil the future.
Excellent point. And talk about forced liberalization. Actually, is it okay, Thomas, if we just keep going to the students and then we'll come back to you to address these questions? Just give the students a little bit more of an opportunity to address what you said, and then we'll come back to you for answers. Or would you like to say something immediately? You're good with that? Okay, great. So forced liberalization, the question of how will we liberalize? Toshi, is there anything you would like to kind of throw into things at this point?
Post liberalization. I think I don't know much about the global economy, so I have a question about the liberalization is accompanied by the economical growing or not, because economical growing needs being liberal or not. I want to know.
Yeah. The question is, does liberalization actually lead to a growth in the economy or not? Is that really true? That's a great question, because we all assume it does. Okay. Well, thanks, Toshi. And then in Bangalore, guys, anything there that you'd like to begin this interaction with? We have lots of time, so no worries, but is there any question or comment?
Oh, yes. When we speak about forced liberalization, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, just go a little louder. Just speak, just don't shout, but almost shout. Go ahead.
When we speak about forced liberalization, I think most of the economists tend to forget the political aspects, socio-economic aspects, because we cannot differentiate or we cannot isolate economic development or liberalization from political stability. Let's take an example of African nation. Let's take an example of Egypt. Let's take an example of Zimbabwe. What's happening over there? It is because of liberalization which they took in late 1980s and 1990s. What happened there was the spread of nepotism. Political power has been concentrated on few political elites without distributing it. So it actually widens the gap of rich and poor. It brings economic instability. It actually increases the Gini index. So So how can we say that forced liberalization or imposing liberalization or just promoting liberalization without actually understanding the socio-economic conditions and political conditions or bringing up the political stability will be successful?
Okay, fair. What's your name?
Yeah, my name is Arun Teja.
Oh, damn. How do you... With the audio, and then there's several syllables going in there. You've got to go back. Yeah, it's the combination of the bad audio and multiple syllables. Did you... What, how do you spell it?
A-R-U-N.
Oh, it's Arun. Oh, 2 syllables. Why did I hear 4? I heard 4 syllables. I think it's the audio. From,
Can I answer
okay. Oh, well, hold on 2 seconds. Okay, hold on 2 seconds. Just because I want to... This is great, and there's a lot of... Thomas, did you get that final comment from Arun about politics and political... So that we have to address that too? Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
but before I
please
answer
go
to
ahead.
that, I would like to invite our students here, just to make a comment. So if you have any comments to that or opinions, because I know that they have, so be brave. Yeah. Come here.
Great.
Okay. No, my name is Kanya. Actually, I'm coming from South Africa. For me, when it comes to the liberalization,
come into the camera. Can you? We can't see you. Sorry, we need to see your. Oh, there you are. Yeah. Okay. Good. Great.
No, I think when it comes to the liberalization, what should probably be the matters that should be put in place. It should be the terms of the liberalization, because what's happening, if you can take a look at, for instance, most of the dominant countries, when it comes to liberalization, they tend to explore those less developed countries, which is they also use those less developed countries as their dumping place of some certain product, which is at the end, for me, I believe that even if we can also take a look, for instance, on the reinvestment of the foreign direct was that certain developing countries, that the receiving country of the foreign directors. Because what's happening, for me, I don't see any sort of much positive impact on the economic growth of the country if ever let's say the foreign direct, the foreign direct investor of, let's say from in Germany, that has put foreign direct investment in Hungary. If ever, let's say, the profits that they are making, they're going to go and probably reinvest them in Germany. So for me, it's sort of like an exploitation of the Hungarian resources. Why not the foreign directors should reinvest in the SMEs within Hungary so that also the Hungarian enterprises could be able to develop themselves and the economy could develop rather than just the country is going to always dependent on the foreign direct investment. So I think there should be sort of some regulations on the liberalization on how are we going to be allow your proper enterprises to trade in our country at a certain level, that these are the conditions.
Sure. What's your name again? Sorry?
Kanya.
Kanya. Thank you. I think Kanya? Kanya?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, excellent. Kanya. Thank you very much. Thomas, please, if there are other students, go ahead, but it's yours to help us understand.
Hi there. Can you hear me? My name is Craig.
Yes.
I'm also from South Africa. I actually want to talk to a different point that was raised by Dr. Novak, and that is the internationalization of education. So one of the points that was made is that there's an increasing trend of university students studying abroad, physically traveling to another country and studying. But at the same time, you mentioned technological advancements. So the way I see it, in the future, there will be more global classes and more people learning online, whether it's self-learning or whether it's, as I said, with global classes. So I don't think the trend of physically traveling to another country is sustainable, simply due to the fact of technological advancements, which is also quite sad because I think the threat there is that you grow more from physical interaction with diverse cultures as opposed to through technology. The other point I actually want to make as well is that when it comes to youthful populations in the world, you mentioned India as well as Africa. There's a lot of youth that are there, and with technological advancements, there's also artificial intelligence, improvements with automation and robotics,
Yeah.
which threatens the entire labor market and also disrupts the whole global economy. So I actually would like some comments on how one can respond to that, because whether it's a universal minimum wage or whatever, but nevertheless it is a disruptor. So it would be interesting to hear what he has to say there.
Great. Just add, Craig, before we get to Tom, that we had a class yesterday here. I teach also a class called Humanity's Destiny, just about where we on planet Earth are going in this millennium. And artificial intelligence came up again, as it continues to come up, as the number one thing that students are thinking about in terms of the future, in terms of job opportunities, job displacement. So it's really great that you've brought that up, AI, and how that might impact the global economy. Anyways, Thomas, please go ahead. Try to help us understand a bit about, coming back to Abhinav and his point about forced liberalization and whether liberalization is actually a good thing or not. Does it create dependency of a less developed country on a giant? There are a lot of things here around liberalization that I think you need to address. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. There have been several very good questions. Let's turn to this forced liberalization. And you use the examples of European countries like Hungary and other less developed European Union member states. I would say that let's begin with the theoretical perspectives. In theory, we have two basic approaches. The first says that we must have a sudden and forced liberalization to be introduced in a less developed country, because then it would have a big pain in a country, but only for a short period of time, and after that, a very rapid development would begin. So that's the first school of thoughts. The second school of thought said that it's a stupid thing. You must be very, very careful, and this can be called as a gradualism. You must introduce liberalization steps only one by one in a very gradual way, because it would give enough time for the domestic economy to adjust to this increasing competition. And my stake here is that I don't know the answer. In fact, I have to tell you, because I can mention you several very successful countries which had really liberalize their economy overnight. I want to mention you first a very small European country, which is Estonia. Estonia is very small. It was really a forced and sudden liberalization of everything which is related to domestic and international economics. And today, this country is probably the most rapidly developing Central European state, with the highest internet penetration and the best endowments with IT experts. So that's a very good example. But there is, again, the bad example of the Greece or some other Western European countries like Portugal, where there was not such a sudden liberalization, but definitely the liberalization was quite rapid, and the outcome doesn't seem to be very satisfactory at this stage. So good example, bad example in Europe. And let's turn to the Asian economies, the Asian countries. There are very, very successful countries which started their economic development under very, very protective trade and economic regimes. Let's have the example of South Korea, or China, or even Japan, or I would tell you the United States. The United States started its economic development in the 19th century with the complete protectionism against the Great Britain. So that was the first and most protectionist trade regime ever introduced in the United States. Yeah. So I would say that probably the best solution is a kind of phasing of liberalization. That first, if a country is underdeveloped, definitely the solution probably is better if you have a more protective regime. But then can come the question where from you can finance your development if you don't have liberalization and capital inflow. Because there are some countries where the lack of domestic capital makes it almost impossible to finance development. In Korea or in China, it was the case because they had a very large domestic savings. So they were able to finance their development from their own sources. But let's have the example of Hungary, my country, at the beginning of the 90s. We did not have any capital to be invested in the economy. We had an extremely high indebtedness to the Western and foreign debtors. So we were forced to liberalize, in fact, because we did not have other choice at that period. And it seemed to be working very well for several years, and Hungary became the most successful country in the Central Europe. But it is not anymore, unfortunately. But I wouldn't say that the forced liberalization is bad or good always. It depends. It depends on the economic historic period, and it depends on the country. So it's very complicated.
Sure.
We do not have a clear answer to that. You always must analyze individual countries in a given international economic and political environment.
Yeah,
that's my answer to that. As regarding the liberalization and economic growth, if I were a Western European or a US economist, definitely I would say that liberalization is needed for economic growth, because it's possible to sell more products abroad, which then contributes to the profitability rate of the domestic firms and things like that. But if I were a Chinese economist or a Korean economist or a Japanese economist from the 50s, then I would say that no, we don't need that. At first we must develop our manufacturing industry from domestic resources and allow our exporters to go abroad, but don't allow import into your country. So after of development, like in Japan or in South Korea or now in China, then you can allow import, because then you can compete with the foreigners. And in addition to that, you may have a quite good or strict regulation, like the China has. For example, you can invest in China whatever amount you want, but you would never get a majority ownership in a Chinese foreign joint venture firm. So that's the key, that everybody wants to invest in China, and the Chinese want that, but they won't let the control out of their hands. So probably that's...
Well, Thomas, let me stop you for a sec. Only because I see we're getting quite a lot of questions coming in on the live chat, and Sandeep has identified one, and I just want to make sure the live stream viewers have a chance to also contribute, and then we'll come back, because I just want to thank Abhinav that you've really introduced a great theme of liberalization. You know, he was addressing it, but now this idea of forced liberalization, that's a very important conflict potentially that so it's very good. We'll come back to that as well, but let's see. There's a question. It looks like it's from Bangladesh, from Dhaka.
India. Christ University.
Is it? No, right up here on the, that's Chitresh. I'm pretty sure Chitresh is in Bangladesh, if I remember. But maybe it isn't. Is he in India?
Oh. Bangalore.
Bangalore. Oh, yeah, he's in Bangalore. Okay, so, sorry, because I know we have some students watching the live stream just, of course, northeast of you in India, in Bangladesh. But anyways, the question, hasn't advancement of technology also led to increased vulnerability of online frauds? Okay, let me repeat that. Has not the advancement of technology also led to the increased vulnerability of online frauds? So has corruption, I guess, increased at the same time as technology has also advanced more? What do you think? Tomasz, are we dealing with an economic problem? More frauds are being committed. More crime is being committed now as a result of more technology.
Yeah, for sure. The technological development is continuous, and always new instruments and technology appears, which makes possible for certain economic actors to utilize it in a wrong way. And it happened always, because the regulation is always slower than the technological development. So I wouldn't say that the number of these frauds is more widespread currently than it was 20 years ago or 40 years ago. What definitely has changed, that the amount which is in question has increased very significantly due to the liberalization of financial transactions. Now it's much easier to send money from abroad. There are the emergence of new cryptocurrency. Sure. So I wouldn't say that it has become much more widespread due to the technological advancement, because it was always the case. But it's more visible. I would say it's more visible, and more people know about that because of the internet technology. You write an article in the United States, and you can read that all over the world at the very same moment. So more people knows more about these frauds than they knew about these frauds just 20 years ago. So I think that there is no significant change, but definitely the knowledge.
Knowledge, yeah, the awareness. Sure, I understand, and the knowledge. Okay. Yeah, come on. Okay, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, just to a point that was brought up sort of earlier about...
Come on.
Yeah, I'm right here. Go ahead. Yep,
just was a point earlier about how certain countries reacted differently to forced civilization. I think part of that is how the country as a whole deals with its own economy. Like Greece, for instance, while it went forced, it also had in place a very big welfare system where a large majority of the country, rather than working, were surviving off that welfare state.
Right.
And so the people of the country weren't in a state to take on that forced civilization and that business standpoint, because the majority of them were relying on the government for their monthly paychecks rather than their own intuition.
Very good. Okay, Avery, sorry, I heard somebody go, hold on. Did somebody want to add to that in terms of that? Avery is giving the example of Greece, and his opinion is that liberalization really did not work there, as also Tomasz had mentioned as an example where it failed. In your opinion, because there were a lot of people, how can I say this? In your perspective, we say gaming the system. They were using the government through welfare fraud, and they hadn't developed an entrepreneurial kind of atmosphere to liberalize or something like that along those lines. Okay. Did I see somebody in Bangalore wanted to comment on that at all? Or
there are a couple of questions to these, and then we'll come back to it. We have a couple more questions.
Please go ahead. Sure, Madhu, go, please.
Okay, I had a question for Thomas, and the question is about here in India, we are very much worried about the Chinese OR, the infrastructure project that started. But looks like Hungarians or Europeans are more welcoming of China than we are here in India. So of course we have that with China, but we are also worried that it is going to overtake it's going to take the position of United States in Europe before China became popular, or before China became a greater power. So isn't China replacing the United States in Europe as well? Or are we just too China-phobic? What is your take on that?
Well, Thomas, did you get that? It's a great question.
Could you repeat it, Lance?
Okay, sure. Madhu, and if I get the translation wrong, come on in, guys, please tell me. But I'm going to distill this down to one or two sentences. Basically, Madhu, you were saying that in India right now, there is fear of China's expansion, whereas in Europe, it seems like there's more of a welcoming of China expansion. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And so, Thomas, it's great because you're bringing it back, Madhu, to a very critical point that Thomas made at the beginning about the second driver in the global economy underneath the United States is China. But what seems to be emerging in our conversation is that China is now becoming more the number, just in terms of our conversation. So, Thomas, how do you answer Madhu in India when she is saying, we are a little worried about China in India right now, but you aren't in Europe? How do you answer that?
That's a very good question, and this brings me to the importance of geographical distances, because India is very close to China geographically, and Europe is not so close, so it's quite far from there. And I I would tell you the Central European perspective, because in Central Europe, several countries today consider that we are too much depending on the Western Europe. Most of our trade, 80% of our trade is carried out with the European Union countries. 85% of the foreign direct investments came to the Western Europe or the United States. So there is, I think, a general consensus which says here that we are too much depending on the West. So let's somehow diversify our economic relations, and the best solution can be the China, which has the capital enough and the interest in economic relations. So, and there is another point that most of the analysts in Central Europe say at the moment China doesn't want to get something in exchange. So here the politicians, and I would say the experts too, say that, okay, China is coming, is investing, but it doesn't want anything in exchange, only business, only business. While in other countries, like, let's say, the European integration or the International Monetary Fund, always wanted these countries to follow their politically motivated steps and behavior. So this is probably the general perspective now here, that China now is good because it contributes to the economic diversification of the Central Europe. China is good at this moment because it doesn't want to get any political allowances or political things in exchange, which is different from the West. So that's
yeah, sure.
That's why
sure.
That's why people, not only the people but the governments and the politicians, do not fear much about the China. Of course, everybody knows that the Chinese people and the Chinese government is very, very smart. But at this stage, nobody sees that it could lead to dangerous situation. I'm sorry, we have Chinese students here, and if you want to add something, just
sure.
you can do that. So if you want, the floor is open.
Well, I was going to say, Thomas, that I'm sure Madhu or others in Bangalore would like to respond to that, because it's really interesting when we have a global class where we start to see the conflicts develop between countries, and we can address them in this class in a way where we can really learn something and understand. So there does seem to be a conflict that we put our finger on right now, and that is China is the, let's say, the #1 driver of economic change on this planet right now. Thomas, would you agree with that? China is now the #1 driver of economic expansion on planet Earth. Yes?
Yes, because of two reasons. The first is that there seems to be this vague developing due to the withdrawal of the United States, that there is the Chinese own economic interests to develop their economic growth and to maintain the economic development by increasing the number of the countries with which it has very good economic relations. So I would say these two reasons. One is related not to China, but to the United States.
Okay, great. So, sorry, Daniel, you want to add something? Because I want to go back to Madhu for a second. Daniel, go ahead.
Go back to Madhu. We'll come back to you.
Okay. Then, if that China is the #1 driver, and certainly I could say that in terms of its impact on Canada and Canadian immigration too, and number of Chinese students here as well. But Madhu and in Bangalore, why are you worried about China? Thomas has just said they don't want anything in return. It's just about business. You know, it's just business. They're not going to get involved in human rights. They're not going to expect anything. So why are you worried?
No, we, since, as Thomas said, we are close to them, and I think we know a little bit more of Chinese political intentions than everybody else does, or we believe that we know more about it. But the main issue is that OBOR is not just an economic development or infrastructural project. It is in fact politically motivated to make it easy for Chinese military movement, to move into Europe if need be, if ever need be. I mean, I was not one of those who agreed with that view. But now that I hear Thomas saying that Central European nations don't think that Chinese need anything. But aren't they looking at that strategic worry at all? Don't they have that strategic worry at all? Because China can move in. If they construct those roads and if there's free access for Chinese military to move in anywhere, we don't want them to come anywhere near India with that road. And that was our worry, that they would come into anywhere close to India with their military and can wage a war at any moment of time, which has happened before. So we've had that experience before. And I also want to actually know what the Japanese think of Chinese OBOR as well.
Yeah, exactly. Great. I was just going to say, let's go to Toshi, because Japan, has a long history of conflict with China. They've been at war with each other. I mean, it's just so. Toshi, how do you respond to this?
Okay, and I think that yes, it is the fact that our country, Japan, and has a very long history of conflicting. Yes, and now the conflict is regarding the cultures and also the regarding the politics and the economics and something like that. But we have to think that the Chinese is very very big power of the the driver of the world economy. So it is true, and so many of the Japanese ordinary people are thinking about the very emotional aspect of the conflicting about the Chinese, but we have to learn their system of, for example, education or something about the economy or something like that. And one thing that I know is that I have been in Shanghai in March this year, and I went to the Shanghai Jiao Tong University. That is one of the top university in China. Because why I went there? Because I have the government research on computing education in Chinese. And they have very progressive and very good system of education. And many of Japanese, unfortunately, don't know about that. And so they're
progressive. You're saying, Toshi, that's interesting. You're a Japanese person who is actually saying China, in mainland China, in Shanghai, is progressive. Really interesting. That's wow.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think they're very progressive. Yeah.
So, are you alone? Would you say in your thinking, or would you say that other Japanese feel the same way?
I think that no. I'm a very minor person about the opinion, because I have that opinion because I saw that in my eyes. But many of Japanese people don't have that kind of information about China.
Sure. No, it's so interesting to hear your view. Abhinav has his hand up, and I wanted to come back to him as well, because you had actually said here that you wanted to say that forced liberalization has not been a good thing. Right?
No,
so, but go ahead, and do you want to comment on?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we need to distinguish between liberalization in terms of a monetary union and bilateral and trilateral agreements. Because when you force a monetary union on member nations such as the EU, and you don't have strict rules, which is that you allow any member for political reasons to join the EU, you risk harming the entire project. Confidence in a European Union on the euro has gone so low because Britain is going to leave, Spain is on the verge of collapse if Catalonia leaves, Portugal is on the verge of collapse, Italy is on the verge of collapse economically. So we need to focus and pay weightage to how forced liberalization works in terms of monetary unions and in terms of bilateral and
Okay, but let me
trilateral
stop you for a second because I want to throw this a bit in your face. Okay, sorry. This is why it's always fun to be in a classroom to teach, is we can ask each other difficult questions, but respectfully.
Yes,
you said up here, forced liberalization. This is a comment that Abhinav sent to the chat, so he's going on the chat, he's here, his mind is moving, it's great. He said forced liberalization is not a positive.
Yes.
So you're...
And I meant forced liberalization in terms of monetary union, because the entire statement is about the European Union.
Okay, because if I understood correctly, Thomas was saying in Budapest that forced liberalization, Thomas, actually is generally a good example of Estonia. You
Yes.
give some bad examples of Greece and Portugal. But Thomas, you would say generally that we need to be forcing more countries to liberalize because that will actually help create stronger economies. Is that a fair assessment of what you said? I know I'm simplifying, but is that fair?
No, in some cases it might work, and in other cases it cannot work. But in some cases it can be a good solution. Like it was the case in Estonia. And I also said that in the case of Hungary, it seemed to be a very successful strategy at the beginning of the 90s.
Yeah.
So there are good examples, but there are these very negative examples. But don't forget, in the monetary union, Greece, Portugal, Spain joined to the monetary union voluntarily. They wanted to be in. They wanted to be in because they considered that it would be very beneficial for them. So nobody forced them. Nobody said them that if you won't join, then you will be kicked out from the European Union. Look at the Brits, the Great Britain, the United Kingdom. They did not join. So I wouldn't say that it was a forced. Rather, the individual countries were in favor of joining, even if you're not prepared for that.
Sure. Okay. Great. Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting to me that you're sort of implying that the European Union should come out and say that this country should not join because it's bad both for the country and for the European Union itself. Whereas, you know, it's not such a huge stepping stone in that sense. There are less economically developed countries, for example, V4 countries, that came together under the flag of the European Union and formed sort of a smaller economic group. Countries have more than one option to develop or to react to whatever it is that you see as either a detriment or a benefit to in itself.
Sure.
And, you know, just to sort of go back to a couple of the technology-related questions. Especially because there was a student here that actually brought up that, for example, artificial intelligence might be a threat to labor.
Yes.
And that was never answered, and this is probably
Craig.
something...
That was Craig from South Africa. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
And this is probably something that many of your students face as well, because one of the things that is absolutely invaluable, regardless of geographic location, is ideas. Startups, for example, have become a driving force of the economy in many, well, mostly Western, but in many countries. And they are built almost entirely on ideas. There are certain functions that can be automated, and there are certain functions that, artificial intelligence can take over. For example, the argument could be made that there could be a robot that moderates these discussions. There could be an AI that, sends out all the technical information and then suddenly becomes essentially useless to the class because, those emails can be automated. But simultaneously, there are certain situations that AIs can't react to, and this is something that you wouldn't know unless you work with technology, unless you work with these things. But artificial intelligence in its current form is literally decades away from actually being intelligent. They can do certain things and they can function in a very, in a very strict way, but they aren't actually. So the bottom line here is that I think one thing that, you know, even less developed countries such as Hungary or any other Africa, you know, basically any country can bring is ideas. And in particularly, for example, in Israel, there is an infrastructure to support ideas. And that's certainly.
Well, I would make a confession, but I am a living, breathing example. I am a walking algorithm. You know, I am not real. I am driven. I'm just binary inside me, and I am a hybrid. You know. Anyways, I'm just kidding. But we all are on our way to becoming algorithms. But just a second, finish your point, and then we've got to come to India because I see a hand, and we'll come back here, Daniel. So
and I think the bottom line here is that one thing that does not get outdated are ideas, and you know, and innovation in general. And there are certain economic players that have, you know, taken strides to support that, to create an infrastructure that fosters ideas, that helps young people, you know, come up with their own innovative ways to look at certain aspects of the global economy. And those countries are thriving. For example, you know, from Singapore to Israel, one of the things that the United States lost was that innovation. They've moved away from the United States. So, you know, the bottom line is that I think it comes down to individual responses. It's very hard to say that the European Union has made a mistake by accepting certain countries, because why should the European Union as an economic union or a political union know better?
Well, I'll just, before we continue, you're actually, I'll make a connection here that maybe we're not all seeing, which is Toshi said in Japan that he went to a university in Shanghai and he was quite impressed with its progressiveness. And Toshi, is it correct for me to interpret progressiveness as being supporting new ideas?
Yes,
would you say?
Yeah. Their way of educating the students are very innovative. They accept the innovative way of thinking or very creative way of thinking, and I think that I guess because in China, a lot of people in university knows and how computing is important, or is going to be important in the future of the Chinese country. And so the industry and also the university people, they are getting together to make the new way of educating computing majors or computing people. So
sure.
Yes, but unfortunately, our country, in Japan, very few people recognize that the educating the engineer of the computer science is very important issue for the country. But many of people are thinking about that investment of just money is crucial, but bringing such kind of young people of being engineering is not so important. I think that many of Japanese think that they can buy the technology.
Ah, interesting. You know, okay, well, the connection I wanted to make is that if China is investing more in ideas, and you've seen this, then perhaps that accounts to some extent, Daniel, for why you're seeing a greater presence of China in Hungary, because China is prepared to become more invested in new ideas, and they're prepared to be more open to the rest of the world. In the history of human civilization, China has largely been closed to the world. I mean, if you look at human societies, China has grown often in isolation, but now they're actually opening much more to the world, and that's quite powerful. that may account to some extent for China's presence. Anyways, let me come to India for a second, just to give you a chance, because I know you're waiting. Please, and we only have, believe it or not, about 5 minutes left, but we'll make the best of it. Okay? So go ahead.
Hello, this is Ashutosh. If we can go back to China's role in global economy, I want to ask that China's grand strategy of cooperative dominance over Eurasia faces its toughest test in Asia. I want to know how China is building its influence in the Eurasian region but facing hurdles in the Asia-Pacific regions. For example, countries like Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, they are very much insecure about the idea of OBOR and also the South China conflicts.
Sorry, can you give your name again?
Ashutosh. Make it simple.
Ashutosh. Okay. Can I ask you a difficult question? Because it's very important we come back to the theme that Thomas brought up. He will have the final word on this as well. We've talked about this. Are you... Why not?
I'm afraid of the economic exploitation policy which China is using. If you see the example of Haban Dota Code in China, what's happening there? Sri Lanka, sorry. If you look at the Gwadar Code in Pakistan, a recent report in a Dawn newspaper, which is a Pakistani newspaper, says that the revenue, 91% revenue will go to the China and 9% revenue will go to the Pakistan. So it's very much exploitative in nature.
Can you just repeat that information? You gave some very interesting information. I just heard the 90% Pakistan. I didn't get the whole thing. Just rewind and say that again loudly, okay? So we can all hear it.
It's a China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is extension of OBOR in Pakistan. They are having a Gwadar port in the southernmost area. So I'm saying that the revenue model is like that. The 91% revenue will go to China and 9% revenue will go to Pakistan. For me, this is very exploitative in nature.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, got you. So you're saying China actually is very exploitive when it comes to foreign investment. 90% of the revenue is going back to China in these investments.
But, it must also be stated how much they invested, right? So if someone owns 90% of a company, they deserve 90% of the revenue. So that must also be looked into, that how much has China initially invested. I mean, I don't know exactly what the point was, but it must also be looked at what the it must also be looked at what the initial investment was. So
sure, okay. Sorry, go ahead. Do you want to just add something in Bangalore? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I see a hand. Oh, here we go. Okay, just so you know, in Budapest, we have about 3 minutes left, and I know, Toshi, you've got to go get your son. You've got to go because it's past midnight in Japan. So, Thomas, you will have the last final summary of some of the key points, and then we will continue this in another class. But let's we need to get China into with China moment, please. That's for sure. Go ahead, please, in Bangalore.
Sir, I'm adding up the point what Ashutosh spoke about. He talked about Gwadar, but speaking of companies, 70% of the port controls, that is a nation's sovereignty, is owned by China. So this isn't business anymore. China owns the sea. That means the whole of Indian Ocean is technically in China's control. So which is a threat for nations surrounding it. It's pretty much similar to South China Sea all over again.
Okay. I think it's clear that in Bangalore you've given some good information to all of us about why we might need to be more worried about China than we are. But Thomas, you know, I'm not going to stand anywhere. I'm just trying to guide this. I don't want to, you know, give a position. But I have a reality here that has to be addressed, which is we're just about out of time. And so I promise you all, including my students, we will do this again. We must have a class like this with China. Because we've really talked a lot about it. But Thomas, you've listened to, the conversation. You've helped us right at the beginning identify China as, you said, the number 2 driver. Incredibly, we haven't even talked about the United States, which tells you something about how the United States might be becoming less and less relevant, at least under Donald Trump. And we've talked a lot about China. So that's what Donald Trump wants. He wants to withdraw from the world. Thomas, how should we summarize this class? What do you think is really important for us to think about as we end this class?
I think that this class was very important because we identified several topics about which we can have the next classes, global classes. The first relates, of course, to China, but I also would suggest to deal with the so-called welfare states, because there was a very interesting comment coming from Canada, which said that the problems with Greece was partly related to this welfare state structure. It's extremely interesting, and also when we are talking about that, several intercultural differences can be mentioned. And the third very important topic related to digitalization and artificial intelligence, which was mentioned by Craig. And I want to just add 2 sentences to that, 2 facts. That although the digitalization is going on, and although artificial intelligence is just deepening, and electronic trade is just growing, but there are 2 very interesting developments. The first is that Amazon, a giant electronic bookstore of the United States, has just opened its first physical bookstore in the United States, which may indicate something. And the other is just check through the internet the data on e-book trade in the United States. It has declined in the last 2 years. It has started to decline e-book trade, and instead of that, the printed book trade has increased considerably. So it seems to be that maybe there is a linear development of digitalization and artificial intelligence, but there are very interesting new developments which are just directing into the opposite direction. So I would conclude this.
That's great, Thomas. There's 4 ideas there, and for sure we will follow this up. Toshi, I hope you will be able to join us, perhaps if it's possible with students, but it's very late there. So, but to at least have you and your contribution has been invaluable in the historical reference we're able to give. Connection is excellent, so thank you. We hope to see you again in a global class. And, of course, in Bangalore as well, Madhu, we hope to see you again, too. And in Budapest, absolutely. I wanted to say one thing, just one thought to think about, to build on what Thomas just said, that sometimes we go backwards. That is kind of odd. But yet he gave a very compelling example. I'm going to give one more compelling example of how sometimes the world sometimes goes backwards and sometimes goes forwards. Here it is. If you look at 10,000 years of civilization on planet Earth, with humanity expanding into this incredible, 8 billion on the planet, 195 countries, 250 countries and independent states and territories, what we are actually beginning to see again is India and China are re-emerging as the great powers. Now, that is an odd thing. You know why? Because if you go back in human history to the beginning of human societies, long before there was the United States, long before there was Europe, there was India and there was China, even before Japan. And I just think it's kind of interesting that as we go forwards in this 3rd millennium, we seem to be talking more about China and India, and as if they just are new to the game. They're the oldest players in this game, and maybe we need to think about that. China and India are great forces that we have to really deal with. They are deep in the story of humanity, and they're not going away. So I wanted to just end on that. Is there anything, Madhu, you would like to say in India before we sign off?
Just wanted to add on to what you said. Because it's India and China, we would like to be India and China, and not just China everywhere else. So just to add on to that.
Yeah. That's India and China. Okay, well, we'll say, we're going to go together. You know, India, China, Hungary, Canada, you know, Asia, America, Africa. We're going to try and to make this work. But thank you. Thank you all. And Thomas, of course, thank you greatly for the insights. And we'll see you in another global class soon, okay? Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye. Okay.